A billionaire came to inspect the orphanage, but froze when a tiny girl in glasses whispered, "Take someone healthy instead. I'm not worth keeping." The orphanage sat at the edge of town, a tired gray building that seemed to sag under its own memories. The paint on the walls had once been bright, but now it peeled in thin curling strips, revealing layers of color from years gone by. The hallways echoed with footsteps, laughter, crying, and the quietness that came after all of those sounds. In one of the rooms, sitting on a wooden bench that was too large for her small frame, was Layla. Only 5 years old, she wore a pink dress that had been washed so many times its color had faded into something softer, almost pastel. Her blonde hair fell in uneven waves to her shoulders, as though someone had trimmed it quickly, without care. On her nose sat large round glasses that always slipped down, too heavy for the delicate bridge they rested on. She pushed them up every few minutes out of habit rather than hope. Her blue eyes were wide and deep, but they didn't shine the way children's eyes usually did. Instead, they held a quiet understanding that life was something that could take away more than it gave. Layla had not always been here. Before, she had lived in a small apartment with her mother, who sang as she cooked and always hugged her tight enough to make her feel safe. But her mother had gotten sick, and the sickness did not leave. It took her slowly, gently in some ways, but completely. After her mother died, Layla's father tried to care for her, but grief settled over him like thick fog. He began to drink to sleep, to forget, to stop feeling. When doctors told him Layla's eyesight would fail, that she might go blind one day, something inside him broke. He convinced himself he was doing what was best. He convinced himself another family could give her more. He convinced himself she was better off without him. So he brought her here and walked away. Layla did not scream after him. She did not chase him. She simply sat where he left her and folded her hands in her lap. She had not cried since. The other children played loudly in the room that day. They were laughing, building towers of blocks, running in circles, tugging on toys, shouting each other's names. But Layla stayed apart. The caregivers had tried to encourage her to join them, but she always withdrew, quietly, politely, as though she didn't want to disturb anyone by being sad. She smoothed the fabric of her dress again and again, tracing the threadbare seams, as if keeping them straight would keep her life from falling apart completely. She knew the world did not want children who were broken. She had heard adults talking when they thought she was asleep. She knew her father had not left because he hated her. But he had still left. And that was enough to teach her that love could disappear. She blinked slowly, pushing her glasses up again, and stared at the window. Outside, light filtered through, warm and gentle, making dust sparkle in the air like tiny stars. Layla liked the light. She liked knowing she could still see it. Sometimes she imagined it disappearing one morning, her world fading into shapes and shadows, and she told herself it was okay. She was already learning to live quietly, to take up little space, to ask for nothing. She never spoke unless spoken to. She never cried for attention. She never reached out. She simply waited. Not for someone to take her home. Not for rescue. She waited for the moment the world would become blurry and then disappear. But deep inside, where hope still lived like a faint ember, there was something else. A wish she did not dare think, that someone, someday, might look at her and not see brokenness or burden, but simply see a child who needed to be held and told she was wanted. She did not know yet that someone was already on his way. And that her life, without warning, was about to change. The morning Alexander Bryce arrived, the sky was clear, a pale blue that stretched wide and empty above the city. He drove himself rather than sending a driver, a habit he had developed after his wife passed. Driving gave him something to hold on to, something to focus on besides the quiet in his own mind. His car moved down the winding road that led to the orphanage, the tires humming softly, the world passing in gentle motion outside the window. He didn't know exactly why he was going there. Officially, it was part of a philanthropic initiative to fund improved medical care for children in state institutions. Unofficially, he was searching for something that he had been missing for years, though he didn't know how to name it. Inside the orphanage, the director was bustling with nervous energy, smoothing her hair, straightening her jacket, making sure the hallways were presentable. A billionaire was visiting, a man whose name was in newspapers, whose face was familiar on televised interviews. The staff whispered as they passed, their voices lowered out of habit, discussing his wealth, his status, his tragedies. Everyone knew about his wife, the elegant woman with a voice like soft music, who had worked beside him to start children's charities and medical foundations. Everyone knew she had died suddenly from an illness no one expected. Everyone knew that ever since, his eyes had not been the same. Alexander stepped inside the building, and the first thing he noticed was the smell, a mix of cleaning solution, old books, and something faintly sweet, like plastic toys that had been handled by many small hands. Children's drawings covered the walls, some neat, others chaotic scribbles of bright colors. A caregiver led him into the main playroom. The space was full of noise, laughter, arguments, footsteps, toys clattering to the floor. Children of all ages were gathered there, playing, talking, showing off to each other and to the adults who walked among them. He paused at the doorway, taking in the scene. He could feel the faint ache in his chest again, the ache that came when he saw something innocent and joyful that he could not entirely touch. Still, he stepped forward. As soon as the children noticed him, they swarmed, some pulling on his sleeve, some tugging his hand, some asking questions all at once. They wanted attention, wanted to be seen. He smiled, genuinely but softly, answering their questions, learning their names. He crouched down to speak to them at eye level, his voice patient, his posture gentle. He had always been good with children, and it showed. He had once imagined his house full of them. That dream had died along with his wife. Or so he thought. While the children clustered around him, he glanced around the room, scanning the faces. Some children radiated joy, others tried to hide uncertainty behind loud voices, and some hovered at the edges, hoping but not daring to approach. And then he saw her. Layla sat apart from the others, her small figure pressed into the corner of a wooden bench. She was not playing. She was not watching. She was simply there, quiet, still, as though she had learned how to make herself invisible. Her pink dress was faded, her glasses too large, and her hands folded neatly in her lap. She did not look up even when the room grew noisy. It was as though she didn't believe the world had anything to offer her. Something inside Alexander shifted. He excused himself gently from the cluster of children and walked toward her. He moved slowly, not wanting to startle her, and stopped just a few inches away before lowering himself onto one knee so he would not tower over her. "Hello," he said softly. Layla blinked and pushed her glasses up, but did not immediately respond. When she finally lifted her gaze to him, he saw something in her eyes that caught his breath. Not fear. Not shyness. Acceptance. As if she had already prepared herself for whatever he would say. He asked, "Why aren't you playing with the others?" Her voice, when it came, was small and even, not sad, not angry, simply factual, as though she had practiced these words many times in her mind. "Take someone healthy instead." The room noise faded behind him. He felt the sentence like a hand closing around his heart, not painful, but profound. He didn't respond at first. He simply watched her. Her face remained calm, almost blank, but her fingers faintly tightened around the fabric of her dress, revealing the truth her voice was too tired to carry. "Why do you think that?" he asked, his voice quiet. Layla lowered her eyes again, as if bracing herself to repeat something she believed deeply. "Because I'm going blind," she said. "And I'll be trouble. Nobody needs trouble." Alexander exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carries both grief and recognition. He knew what it meant to lose something precious. He knew what it meant to stop expecting anything good. And he recognized, in Layla's small stillness, a pain very close to his own. He did not reach for her. He did not rush to reassure her. He simply sat beside her on the bench, leaving just enough space that she could choose to close it or leave it. And he stayed there. Not to fix her. Not to save her. But to see her. The bench felt hard beneath them, but neither moved. Layla kept her gaze lowered, watching the soft creases of her dress where her small hands rested. Alexander didn't speak at first. He understood too well that fragile space where a child had learned not to hope. If he rushed, she would retreat. If he pushed, she would shut down. So he waited. The room bustled around them with cheerful noise that felt strangely distant from their quiet corner. Children laughed and shouted, a ball bounced against the floor, a caretaker called for someone to share toys, but Layla remained very still, like someone who had learned that staying unnoticed was the safest place to be. Finally, Alexander spoke, his tone gentle and certain. "Who told you that you are trouble?" he asked. Layla didn't look up. Her answer came slowly, as if each word weighed something. "The doctors. And the people here. And my dad." She did not say it angrily. She said it the way one might recite a lesson. A truth memorized and repeated. Alexander felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen this before in the hospital wards his wife once visited, children who were preparing themselves to be unwanted so it wouldn't hurt when they were left again. He wished, suddenly and painfully, that his wife were there. She would know exactly how to reach this child. "Do you remember what color your mother's eyes were?" he asked. The question surprised her. She blinked behind her large glasses and lifted her gaze just enough to look at him, wary but curious. "Blue," she whispered. "Like the morning sky." Alexander nodded slowly. "So are yours." Layla's fingers curled on the fabric. "But mine won't work soon," she murmured, not as an excuse but as a fact she had accepted. "I heard them say it. I hear what people think I don't hear." She took a small breath. "They said I'll be blind before I turn 7. That I'll be difficult. That I'll need help all the time." "And does needing help make someone unworthy of love?" he asked. Layla hesitated. She didn't know how to answer, because the only answer she had ever seen was abandonment. Her silence was not stubborn, it was shaped from experience. The door at the far end of the room opened and the orphanage director stepped inside. She immediately spotted Alexander beside Layla and hurried over, smiling too brightly. "Ah, she is quiet, yes. Sweet girl. But very delicate." She lowered her voice as though Layla were not there. "Her vision is deteriorating. We don't place children like her easily. Most parents don't want a challenge." Alexander turned his head slowly, and the look he gave the director made her words die on her tongue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply observed her, calmly, deeply, in a way that made it clear she should choose her next words with care. "She can hear you," he said. The director flushed, fumbling to recover. "Of course, yes, I only meant, I know what you meant," he replied quietly. Then he returned his attention to Layla, whose expression had not changed outwardly but whose fingers trembled slightly now, betraying the hurt she would never voice. He reached out, not to touch her, but to place his hand on the bench beside hers, leaving a space of invitation rather than insistence. "Layla," he said softly, "do you know what I do?" She shook her head. She had no interest in adults' titles or money or importance. Alexander continued, "I help people keep their sight. I help doctors learn how to treat eyes like yours. I've spent years trying to save what's precious." He paused, allowing the truth to settle. Your eyes are precious. She looked up at him more fully now. The lenses of her glasses caught the light, reflecting a small flare of brightness. A question trembled at the edge of her mouth. You can fix me? He did not flinch at the phrasing. I don't know yet, he answered honestly. But I can try. And we will try together. And whether you can see the world clearly or only through shadows, you will never be less than worthy. Her breath wavered, just once. She wasn't crying, she had forgotten how to cry. But something inside her shifted, like a door opening just a crack, letting in a thread of light. Why? She whispered. The question hung between them, heavy with years of quiet disappointments. Alexander felt his throat tighten as he answered. Because sometimes, he said, voice low and steady, the world forgets how much someone matters. But I don't forget. And I will not forget you. Layla didn't speak. But after a long, trembling moment, her small hand moved, slowly, cautiously, and rested on top of his. Not grabbing. Not clinging. Simply touching. Choosing to believe him. Even just a little. When the paperwork was approved and the day came for Layla to leave the orphanage, the sky was gray and heavy, as if the world was unsure whether to rain or to let the day remain untouched. Layla stood by the entrance with a small, worn backpack that contained everything she owned, 2 dresses, her glasses case, a paper drawing of a house she remembered from memory, and a tiny stuffed rabbit missing one ear. The caregivers moved around her, some offering gentle smiles, others simply relieved to free a bed. Layla did not cling to them, nor did she say goodbye loudly. She simply nodded when someone patted her shoulder. She had learned long ago that affection could vanish, so she no longer held on tightly to anything she might lose. Alexander stood outside the building beside his car. He didn't offer his hand immediately, instead, he let Layla approach at her own pace. She stepped forward quietly, boots making soft sounds on the pavement. The air felt colder than the temperature suggested. He opened the car door, and she paused, looking at the large, clean interior as though it were something unfamiliar and fragile. She climbed in slowly, placing her backpack on her lap and folding her hands neatly over it, as though afraid to leave marks on the seat. The drive to his home took nearly an hour. Layla watched the world move past outside the window, houses thinning into open fields and then regrouping into upscale neighborhoods. She didn't comment on anything she saw. She simply watched, her reflection faintly overlapping the glass, small, quiet, and alert. Alexander glanced at her occasionally, but he didn't fill the silence with empty reassurance. He knew that silence could be a sanctuary, especially for a child learning how to breathe again. When they reached his home, the mansion rose before them, tall, modern, built of warm-toned wood and glass that reflected the pale sky. To most, it might look magnificent. To Layla, it looked enormous, like a place she could get lost in and never be seen again. He walked slowly beside her as they entered. The foyer was open, the ceiling high, sunlight drifting in from windows above. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus and fresh linen. Layla tightened her grip on her backpack strap. She didn't speak. Her footsteps were cautious on the polished floor. A housekeeper passed through the hallway, paused, and offered Layla a gentle smile. Layla lowered her gaze and gave a tiny nod, unsure how to respond. Alexander knelt to her level, not touching her, but letting her see his face clearly. "You are safe here," he said. Layla did not say she believed him, but she didn't look away. He led her to a bedroom prepared for her. The room wasn't extravagant, he had instructed the staff to keep it simple. Soft cream walls, shelves with books and a few toys, a bed with a pink blanket, not bright pink, but soft, warm, comforting. Layla stood just inside the doorway, her hands still gripping her backpack. She looked at the room as though it were a painting, something beautiful but not meant to be touched. You can put your things wherever you'd like, Alexander said. Layla nodded, but she did not move. Instead, she whispered something so quiet he almost didn't catch it. Do I stay here tonight? He felt the question like a weight. She needed to know if this room was temporary. If she should brace for her return to the orphanage. He met her eyes without hesitation. You stay here always, he said. This is your room. Layla looked around again, slower this time. She set her backpack down on the bed, carefully, almost reverently. Her fingers lingered on the blanket, testing the softness. She climbed onto the mattress, sitting cross-legged as if afraid it might disappear if she moved too quickly. For the first time, she looked less like someone preparing to leave and more like someone trying to understand the possibility of staying. Later, they ate together in the dining room. The meal was simple, vegetable soup and warm bread. Layla ate quietly, small measured bites, as if she feared taking too much. Alexander did not urge her to eat faster or more, he matched her pace instead, letting her see that she did not need to adjust herself to be acceptable. After dinner, he showed her where the light switch was beside the bed, how to pull the blankets up, how to find him if she needed anything. She listened intently, memorizing everything with the caution of someone who had once learned that forgetting could cost her safety. That night, Layla lay under the soft pink blanket, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The room was warm. The bed was comfortable. The air smelled faintly of lavender. But her chest felt tight with the fear that everything could vanish in the morning. She kept her glasses on, though she didn't need them to see the ceiling. She kept her backpack at the foot of the bed in case she had to leave quickly. Sleep didn't come easily. But eventually, exhaustion softened her muscles, and she slipped into dreams she hadn't had in a long time, dreams of sunlight she could still see. Down the hall, Alexander stood in the doorway of his own room, staring out the window into the quiet night. He didn't know if he was doing everything right. He didn't know if love alone would be enough to repair everything she had lost. But he knew one thing, she would never face the darkness alone again. And that was the beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. Something like hope. Mornings in the house were quiet in a different way than the orphanage had been. There were no rushed footsteps, no loud voices echoing through narrow halls, no metallic clatter of trays. Instead, there was the gentle hum of a home waking slowly, the soft sound of sunlight touching windows, and the faint aroma of breakfast being prepared downstairs. Layla woke early on her first full day there, not because she had slept well, but because sleep had been light and tinged with uncertainty. She sat up carefully, her small hands resting on the blanket, as though testing whether the softness was still real. She kept her glasses on, the lenses slightly smudged, and looked around the room to confirm again that she hadn't dreamed it. She slid off the bed silently, almost ghost-like, placing her feet on the carpet with barely a sound. She picked up her backpack and carried it with her out of habit. In the orphanage, she had learned not to leave her belongings unattended. Things had a way of disappearing there. She stepped into the hallway, hesitating only for a breath before walking toward the stairs. The house felt enormous, and the space around her made her feel small in a way she couldn't name, but the air didn't feel cold. It felt open, as if there was room for her here. Downstairs, Alexander was already at the table, reading a folder of medical notes, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He looked up when he heard her soft footsteps. "Good morning," he said, his voice gentle and calm. Layla didn't respond with words at first. She simply nodded, holding her backpack strap. He didn't mention it. He didn't tell her to put it down. He understood what it meant to carry the last things you believe belong to you. Breakfast was oatmeal with honey and sliced fruit. Layla ate slowly, still cautious, taking small deliberate bites. She kept her eyes lowered most of the time, but she watched the room from her peripheral vision, studying the housekeeper's movements, the quiet efficiency of the environment, the fact that no one rushed or spoke too loudly. It felt unfamiliar. Uncertain. Safe in a way that frightened her because she feared safety could be taken away just as easily. After breakfast, Alexander asked if she would like to go somewhere with him. Layla paused, then nodded. He didn't say where they were going. He simply helped her into the car and drove through the city, the buildings growing more spaced apart, until they reached a tall glass medical center. Layla held her backpack tighter. She had been in hospitals before, and they had never brought good news. Inside, the space was calm and bright, the air filled with light reflected from wide windows. Alexander greeted people by name. Doctors and nurses nodded respectfully, not because of his wealth, but because they knew him and what he did. Layla watched closely, not afraid, but preparing. In one of the examination rooms, an ophthalmologist greeted her with a soft voice, introducing herself as Dr. Reeves. She didn't speak to Layla like someone who was fragile or doomed. She spoke to her like a person. She tested Layla's vision carefully, asking her to read letters, follow lights, describe shapes. Layla did her best. She didn't complain when her eyes watered or when she had to squint. She was used to working hard in silence. After the tests, the doctor stepped outside with Alexander, leaving Layla to sit on the table holding her rabbit by the ear. She didn't eavesdrop, but she listened, not for words, but for tones. There was no nervous hesitation, no regret, no pity in their voices. When they returned, Dr. Reeves crouched to Layla's level and spoke clearly. "Your eyesight is getting weaker, but we have time. We have a window where surgery can help. It won't be easy, but it is possible." Layla stared at her, absorbing the information slowly, cautiously. She did not ask if the surgery would hurt. She did not ask what it would cost. She asked the one question that mattered to her. Will I still be allowed to stay with him even if it doesn't work? The doctor blinked, taken off guard. Alexander answered before she could. You stay with me no matter what happens. Your vision doesn't decide that. You do. Layla's fingers loosened slightly on her backpack strap. That evening, back at home, Alexander noticed something small but significant. Layla set her backpack down not at the foot of her bed, but beside her chair in the living room while she drew quietly with colored pencils. She still glanced at it occasionally to make sure it was there. But she had placed it down. A small act. A first step. She did not trust the world yet. But she had begun to consider the possibility that one part of it might not disappear. And that was enough to begin changing everything. The days that followed moved slowly, not in boredom, but in careful steps that felt like learning how to live again. Layla began to explore the house in small journeys, first from her room to the hallway, then to the living room, and eventually to the garden. She never ran. She walked gently, as though the world might break under her feet if she pressed too hard. The house staff learned not to overwhelm her. They greeted her softly, respected her silence, and never tried to take the backpack she still carried from room to room. Alexander made no attempt to accelerate her comfort. He let her decide the pace. One afternoon, Layla stood near the wide glass doors that opened to the backyard. The sunlight created faint halos around her hair, giving her an almost ethereal look. She hesitated, her hand lightly touching the handle. Alexander saw her from a distance but did not call out. He waited. Layla pushed the door open and stepped into the garden. The grass felt soft beneath her shoes, and the air carried the scent of jasmine and fresh soil. She lifted her chin, letting the sunlight rest on her face. She didn't smile, but something in her posture eased. It was the first moment she looked like she belonged to the world again. Alexander joined her after a while, but he did not speak right away. They stood together, both looking out at the garden where pale flowers swayed in the breeze. After some time, he asked her quietly, "Do you remember what your mother loved?" She didn't turn her head. She liked flowers, Layla said. Her voice was steady, but her fingers twisted lightly in her dress. She said flowers grow even when no one watches. She said that means they're brave. Alexander listened, absorbing her words as though they were something sacred. Then I think you're like that, he said. Layla did not answer, but she stayed beside him, which meant she heard him. The next day, a therapist came to the house. She did not arrive with clipboards or clinical distance. She sat on the floor with Layla and brought out colored pencils and small wooden figures. She didn't ask direct questions. Instead, she let Layla choose what to draw. At first, Layla drew only flowers, small, neat, identical, lined up in rows like soldiers. But as the days passed, the drawings changed. A window appeared. A figure. A second figure. A hand reaching out. The therapist never pushed her to explain. Layla spoke more through pictures than through words. Alexander watched these quiet shifts. He admired them not with pride, but with a deep, quiet respect. Healing was not something that happened because he opened his home. Healing was something Layla allowed because she began to believe she could still grow. And then came the night of the first nightmare. It was late, the house dark, the kind of quiet where even the air seemed to rest. Layla woke suddenly, breath trembling, vision blurred not from her condition but from fear. She clutched her glasses and pressed them to her chest. For a few seconds, she didn't remember where she was. The room felt unfamiliar, too soft, too gentle. She waited for the echoes of the orphanage to settle. But they didn't. Instead, there was silence. She slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway, her feet making the faintest whisper against the carpet. She stopped outside Alexander's door but didn't knock at first. She simply stood there, breathing slowly, remembering how she had once stood outside her father's door, afraid to ask for comfort. Her fingers curled. She almost turned away. Before she could, the door opened. Alexander had heard her footsteps. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't speak at all. He knelt so their eyes were level. Layla's lower lip trembled, and she whispered, "I didn't want to bother you." His expression softened in a way she had never seen before. "You are never a bother," he said. "Not to me." Layla's glasses slipped slightly, and he reached out, pausing to let her see the motion, then gently adjusted them. She took a slow breath, as though absorbing the meaning of the moment. He walked her back to her room and sat beside her as she lay down. He didn't touch her, didn't hold her, didn't crowd her. He simply sat. Present. Steady. A quiet promise in the darkness. She fell asleep that way, her breathing slow and even, the fear dissolving back into the shadows. Alexander remained for a long time after, watching the rise and fall of her chest. He did not think about what he had lost anymore. He thought about what he could protect. When he finally stood and walked out, he realized something had changed. Layla had come to him. Not because she had been told to trust him, but because she had begun to trust on her own. And that small, fragile act meant more than any contract, any medical plan, any promise spoken aloud. It meant she was beginning to believe she was safe. The decision for surgery came on a quiet afternoon, when the sky outside was pale and soft, and the house felt still, as though holding its breath. The doctor's voice over the phone was steady and careful, explaining that the window of opportunity was narrowing. If they waited too long, Layla's eyesight would fade beyond what even the most advanced procedure could protect. Alexander listened without interrupting, his hand resting on the kitchen counter, his gaze drifting to where Layla sat at the table coloring quietly. She drew a garden today, tall flowers, a sky, a figure holding another figure's hand. The drawing had more color than the earlier ones. More space. More life. He knew what he had to do. When he ended the call, Layla looked up. She did not ask what the doctor said. She understood the weight of silence. She had grown up inside it. Alexander pulled out the chair across from her and lowered himself into it, setting his hands on the table so she could see they were steady. "Layla," he said softly, "the doctor thinks it's time to schedule the surgery." She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She simply held his gaze for a long moment, searching his face the way one searches the horizon for weather. Her eyes were very still. "Will it hurt?" she asked. He answered with the same honesty he had spoken to her with from the beginning. "Yes. A little. And it will be scary. But you won't be alone." She absorbed the words slowly, nodding once. "If it doesn't work," she whispered, "will I still live here?" The fact that this was her first concern, before pain, before blindness, cut deeper than anything else had. Alexander leaned closer, lowering his voice but not softening its clarity. "You will always live here. With me. No matter what." That was the moment Layla exhaled, a small, trembling breath, as if she had been holding it for months. In the days before the surgery, the house felt different. Not tense, not fearful, but thoughtful. Meals were quiet. Walks in the garden were slower. Layla no longer carried her backpack everywhere. She left it in her room, placed neatly beside a small vase of flowers she had picked herself. At night, she sometimes asked Alexander to sit with her until she fell asleep. He did every time, without question. He didn't talk. He didn't reassure. He simply stayed. The night before the surgery, Layla couldn't sleep. She sat up in bed, knees pulled to her chest, listening to the soft hum of the house. After a while, she slipped down the hallway to the balcony. The moon hung low and round, washing the garden in silver. She stood there quietly until she heard soft footsteps behind her. Alexander didn't ask why she was awake. He stood beside her, hands resting on the railing. "My mom used to say the moon watches over people when they sleep," Layla murmured. "She said it never blinks." Alexander nodded slowly. "Then the moon will watch over you tomorrow. And I will be right there when you wake." Layla turned her head toward him just slightly, not looking fully, but acknowledging him. That was enough. The morning of the surgery came with gentle sunlight, the kind that did not overwhelm but carried a quiet promise. Alexander drove them to the medical center, and Layla held his hand, not tightly, not desperately, but with steady trust. Nurses guided her into a preparation room. They spoke to her kindly, explaining each step. She listened without tears. She had learned long ago that crying did not change anything. But when Alexander came to sit beside her, she leaned her head lightly against his arm. It was the first time she initiated touch without hesitation. When it was time to go into the operating room, she looked up at him, her glasses now removed, her blue eyes slightly unfocused without them. "Will you stay?" she asked. "Yes," he said without needing to think. "I'll be right here when you come back." They took her hand gently and led her through the doors. Alexander watched until the moment she disappeared behind them. Only then did he sit down, his hands clasped together, his breath steady but deep. He had faced boardrooms, crises, funerals, and loss, but nothing had ever demanded as much strength as simply sitting still and waiting for a child he loved beyond reason to return to him safely. Hours passed. Each one felt longer than the last. When the surgeon finally stepped into the waiting room, Alexander stood so quickly the chair behind him scraped across the floor. The surgeon's expression was tired, but his eyes were warm. "She did very well," he said. "The surgery was successful. We preserved her vision." Alexander closed his eyes just for a moment, not a dramatic gesture, just a quiet release of breath he had been holding since the day he first saw her sitting alone on that bench. When Layla woke hours later, it was to the sound of his voice, steady and calm, calling her name. She blinked beneath the bandages, sensing light, sensing presence, sensing safety. Her first words were soft, almost drowsy. "You stayed." Alexander's reply was gentle but absolute. "I will always stay." And though Layla could not yet see the room clearly, she smiled, a small, fragile smile that carried more strength than either of them knew. Layla's recovery was not immediate. Her eyes were bandaged for days, and the world came to her instead through sound, scent, and touch. The house grew quieter during that time, moving with the gentle stillness of a place protecting something delicate. The staff spoke softly in the hallways. Dinner conversations were calm. Lights were dimmed to soothe her adjusting vision. Alexander remained close, never hovering, but always near enough that Layla could reach out and find him if she needed. Sometimes, she woke uncertain, unsure of where she was, the darkness behind the bandages tricking her into believing she had already gone blind. Each time, Alexander would speak before fear could take full shape. He would say her name, not urgently, but steadily, grounding her back into the safety of the world. When the day came to remove the bandages, the doctor visited the house personally. Layla sat on the edge of her bed, hands gripping the blanket, shoulders tight, breathing small and controlled. She did not ask if her sight had returned. She did not ask what would happen if it hadn't. She had prepared herself for either fate, as she had prepared for every disappointment before. Alexander sat beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. The doctor worked carefully, unwinding the bandages layer by layer, soft fabric brushing Layla's cheeks. Light filtered in slowly, dim and blurry at first, then sharpening into faint shapes and edges. Layla blinked. She blinked again, slower this time, testing the world. Her gaze drifted across the room until it stopped on Alexander. His face was clear enough to see. His blue eyes. The faint tiredness from sleepless nights. The small, almost hopeful curve of his mouth. She exhaled, long and shaking, and whispered, "I see you." The doctor smiled, nodding. "Your vision is stable. It will still require care. But you will not lose it." Layla did not cry. Instead, she leaned forward until her forehead rested lightly against Alexander's arm, as though that gesture was the closest she could come to saying everything her voice could not. The following weeks brought gentle transformation. The backpack that she once carried everywhere remained on its hook beside her closet. Her steps through the house grew steadier, less cautious. She began joining meals without being invited. She colored without shrinking into a corner. Sometimes, she even laughed, a small sound at first, like a bird testing its voice, then fuller, brighter. One afternoon, she stood in the garden again, this time without hesitation. The jasmine was in bloom, white petals drifting into the grass. She walked barefoot, her steps light but sure, and looked up at the sky. Alexander watched from the patio, coffee cooling in his hands. He saw how she held herself differently now, not braced against the world, but open to it. She turned, noticing him, and walked over. "Can we plant flowers?" she asked. "For my mom." He nodded, his chest tightening in a way that felt warm instead of painful. "We can plant as many as you want." They worked in the dirt together, Layla's small hands buried in soft soil, Alexander's guiding without controlling. They planted white daisies, lavender, marigolds, and a few wild varieties Layla said looked like sunlight. When they finished, they sat in the grass, dirt smudges on their clothes and fingers. Layla looked at the flowers and said quietly, she said flowers are brave. Because they grow even when the world doesn't look. Alexander looked at her, but she continued before he could speak. "I think people can be brave like that too." He didn't correct her. She understood more than enough. Seasons passed softly. The house no longer felt large and echoing, it was filled with presents. Layla drew pictures and taped them to the refrigerator. She asked questions. She learned to read with Alexander guiding her finger along each line. She learned that home did not mean conditional love. It meant belonging that could not be taken away. One evening, months later, they were sitting together on the couch as warm lamplight filled the living room. Layla leaned against Alexander, her head resting on his sleeve. She traced patterns on the fabric absent-mindedly, comfortable in a way she never allowed herself to be before. Then she spoke, not uncertain, but thoughtful. People used to say I would be a burden. Alexander looked down at her, waiting. Layla lifted her gaze to his. But you didn't leave. He placed his hand gently over hers. Because you were never a burden. You were a child. A child who was hurting. A child who deserved to be loved. She nodded slowly, letting the words settle into the quiet, into her memory, into her understanding of herself. There was no dramatic moment of realization. No grand celebration. Just two people sitting together in a home that had learned how to breathe again. Layla closed her eyes, not in fear of losing sight, but in peace. Alexander watched the flowers through the window, swaying softly in the evening breeze, growing without anyone needing to remind them how. Bravery, he understood now, was not loud. It was gentle. Persistent. Human. And love was the light that never went out.